Let's go back to November 1923. The German economy was so thoroughly broken that paper money was cheaper than firewood. Families literally shoveled thick bundles of cash into their stoves just to keep from freezing. To see how completely the currency collapsed, look at this. This is a single banknote printed for 5 billion marks. By the end of that year, if you wanted to buy a single US dollar, you needed 4.2 trillion of these German marks. The country slowly started to stabilize, but then the 1929 Great Depression hit. Banks failed, factories shuttered, and by 1933, 6 million Germans were out of work. You had highly educated engineers and teachers begging for scraps in the streets. These consecutive financial disasters left the German public traumatized. Having lost their life savings twice in a single decade, they were exhausted and desperate for stability, making them the perfect marks for a monumental con. When Adolf Hitler took power in 1933, he made a very specific pledge. He promised to restore German pride by building a massive, highly advanced military machine. There were two massive problems with that plan. First, the country was completely bankrupt. Second, the Treaty of Versailles strictly limited the German army to 100,000 men and explicitly banned them from owning tanks, submarines, or fighter planes. The rapid expansion of the military appeared to be an economic miracle. In reality, it was a massive financial shell game, a scheme using fake assets to hide a level of debt that the country could never actually afford. The architect of this fraud was Hjalmar Schacht. He was a brilliant banker and the economist credited with stopping the 1923 hyperinflation. Hitler appointed him head of the central bank with one strict objective: find the money to build an army, completely in secret. Schacht's solution was a phantom asset. He set up a company called the Metallurgical Research Corporation, or Mefo. It sounded legitimate, but it was just a shell. It had no offices, no factories, and no employees. It was literally just a bank account and a stack of printed letterheads. Here is how the trick worked. The government would order weapons from major defense contractors like Krupp and Siemens. Instead of paying with actual cash, they handed the factories Mefocals, which were fake IOUs drawn from this empty shell company. You can't pay factory workers with a fake IOU, so the contractors took these Mefo bills to private German banks, who happily exchanged them for real marks. They did this because the central bank secretly guaranteed they would cover the cost, keeping the rising debt entirely off the official public ledgers. Through this closed loop, the Nazi government conjured 12 billion marks out of thin air. They funded an entire war machine using invisible debt, completely bypassing international watchdogs. Shadow banking alone couldn't fund the war machine forever. Building an endless supply of tanks and planes burned through cash fast, so the regime turned its attention to its own citizens. They launched a marketing campaign promising a state-subsidized car, the KDF wagon, to the working class. Families were told that if they deposited 5 marks a week into a state bank account, they would eventually drive one home. The state collected roughly 275 million marks from working-class families. Not a single car was ever delivered to a civilian before the war. Every cent was funneled directly into military production. There was a fatal flaw in Schacht's master plan. Those Mefo IOUs had a 5-year maturity date. The first batch was issued in 1934, which meant by 1939, that 12 billion mark phantom debt was going to become highly visible and very payable. Germany was trapped. They imported raw materials, but only built weapons, leaving nothing to export. Printing money triggered immediate hyperinflation. Defaulting meant total government collapse. By 1938, Hitler's economy was a ticking time bomb. The only way to survive the impending bankruptcy was to secure a massive, immediate injection of stolen wealth. Every Ponzi scheme follows a strict rule. When the cash dries up, you have to rob new investors to pay off the old ones. For the Nazi state, those new investors were neighboring countries. They systematically looted the continent to feed their debt cycle. They annexed Austria to absorb its national gold reserve. They took Czechoslovakia to seize its advanced military factories. And they invaded Poland to exploit its agricultural land and millions of forced laborers. It was organized extortion on a national scale. When they occupied France, they forced the French government to pay a daily occupation cost of 400 million francs to cover the expenses of the German army living on their soil. Hjalmar Schacht knew the math was completely unsustainable. He repeatedly begged Hitler to stop the military buildup and scale back. In response, Hitler fired his chief financial architect and eventually threw him in a concentration camp. War became an inescapable economic requirement. The Nazi economy operated as a parasite that had to continually consume the physical wealth of other nations just to delay its own bankruptcy. A Ponzi scheme relies on infinite expansion, and the map is only so big. In 1943, the German military machine slammed into a wall at Stalingrad. Their territorial expansion halted, and with it, the flow of stolen foreign wealth stopped entirely. Without fresh conquests to service their astronomical internal debt, the phantom economy fractured. The massive, hidden bubble created by those Mefo bills finally burst, collapsing the country's finances from the inside out. The regime spent a decade promising the German people a return to global dominance and prosperity. In the end, their sprawling war machine sat shattered and abandoned among the rubble of their own cities. Hitler's famed economic miracle was a mirage. The regime operated a violent criminal enterprise that drained the life savings of its own citizens and left the country in absolute physical and financial ruin.